Greetings, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Higher Ed Geek Podcast, episode number 160 with Ardis, Kadiu. So if you notice, my voice is a little bit deeper and kind of raspy, just coming off a little bit of a sore throat, but wanted to make sure we got this awesome episode out for you all to enjoy, talking all about how technology and AI can help personalize student communications across the student life cycle. So Ardis brings a lot of experience and expertise and passion for this topic. It was really great talking with him and what his team there at Element 451 are up to. So definitely go check it out, connect with him, keep the conversation going as usual. Please fill out our listener survey. You can find it in the description for this episode. Check out our merch store, and I think that is everything that we need to cover for housekeeping. So please do, without further ado, after this brief message from our sponsor, enjoy this episode number 160, a bonus episode with Ardis, Kadiu.
This episode is brought to you by Kitcaster. Kitcaster books you on top podcasts. How do funded startup founders attract prospects and talent? Podcast interviews. How do entrepreneurs with exits find new deals? Podcast interviews. How do C-suite execs differentiate in crowded markets? Podcast interviews. Kitcaster books you on top podcasts. Click the link in the show notes for a special offer. Celebrate good conversation.
So as we get into the back half of this year's season, really excited to continue talking with great folks here in the higher ed tech space about their work, their background, and kind of the top issues of the day and everything. And for this conversation, discussing the role that AI, artificial intelligence, plays into the education experience of college students and everything, and the work that folks do to help support those students. So a lot to get to. Super excited to have this conversation. So we'll start out as we always do with our guest giving an introduction of themselves and their background of how they got to be where they are today.
Hey, Dustin, how are you? My name is Ardis Kadiu. I'm the founder and CEO of Element 451. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it was great to have you. Happy to have you here and have your expertise on this topic. So just so folks have kind of a background, if you want to give kind of the story of kind of how you got to be where you are today and how Element 451 came to be.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The inception story, that is. So my background, I'm a computer engineer by trade. My undergraduate, I went on to get a business degree from NYU. During that time, I was working at NYU as well. I was both teaching there. I was teaching kind of mobile application development, UI, user experience, and so on and so forth. And also was working on the institution's side as well with things like classroom technology and kind of the website and the digital front door. That's kind of my starting on the institution side and kind of higher education, and kind of that's where I kind of fell in love with a lot of the problems that we're trying to solve today, especially around student engagement and student experience. And then that's where that started, right? Because I was helping NYU, and I was helping the institution make sure that the student experience, the front door was really, really great. And that experience was great. But then as they were coming in, they were kind of transitioning to the other systems in the school. And that didn't really match quite a bit, right? That experience was a little bit disjointed, as they were entering into their application systems or as they were entering into some of the other systems. So essentially, one of the things that I did after that is move on to kind of form a marketing agency and help many more institutions with their, with their student recruiting, kind of the application systems, the top of the funnel recruiting. So I formed a company called Spark 451, which is a direct marketing agency. And then that's kind of where I started building the technology, or started building Element 451 inside of that agency, because we needed to personalize it. We needed to take a different approach to how we are reaching out to those students, kind of connecting that school and the student together. And then fast forward, we built, quite a bit of technology in there to personalize that experience of the student, to personalize communications, to personalize a lot of the outreach. And we kind of spun out Element 451 out of that, as we had a full, robust, fully kind of end-to-end system, end-to-end marketing automation and kind of CRM platform and application management system. But that's kind of that's kind of the inception of where we are today, and is kind of relates to some of the topics we'll talk today around AI and specifically AI around kind of CRM. It really was the need for us to personalize communications, to personalize those experiences, to personalize interactions. And in order for us to do that, we really needed a lot of data, needed to understand that end user or that student or prospective student. And in order to do that, obviously, we needed to gather that data both from their behavioral data and also from enriching data from some of the other sources as well. And we needed to get really, really good at it. So that's kind of the inception of Element, and that's the inception of some of the AI topics that perhaps we can touch on today.
Yeah, absolutely. And it sounds like, I'm sure similar to other folks who've kind of like, built and started things where like at a certain point it was kind of, scratching your own itch or just sort of, epiphanies and observations that you've had from your own experience, and really being able to bring that in here is really great. So really quickly though, because yeah, you've kind of led us right in to kind of segue towards, our topic of the day here, but make sure that folks have a good understanding. If you want to make sure to kind of summarize, paraphrase as succinctly as you can, I guess, just the work exactly that Element 451 does, as some people don't even know like the lingo of like a CRM and those sort of things, but like, how do you see it sort of supplementing and augmenting the work of hired professionals out there?
So Element 451 is, we like to call ourselves a student engagement CRM. And what that means is that a school or an institution is able to use Element all the way from top of the funnel, from the student recruiting for that prospective student where they're interacting or they don't even know who that student is, from chat to inquiry to kind of capturing their activity on the website, all the way to the application process, to that student, to sending communications to that student through email, SMS, and other channels, to handling the whole application experience, and then even further when they became a student as well, to handling that engagement with that student at that time. So Element is really an engagement platform that you can think about it as a marketing automation, plus handling all of the application processes that a school would need as well.
From all that experience, the day to day in your current work, but certainly, you've been in the education space here for a long time. And, currently, I think there's issues that higher ed is facing that has sort of been like, looming for some time. And I think it's really kind of coming to a front here. But, you're really at that front lines. Obviously, the work of higher education out in the marketplace, as it were, these prospective interested students and everything. I'm sure you're just getting all this exposure and kind of understanding of a lot of these current challenges that colleges are facing right now. So, as you're seeing it, what do you think are some of those current challenges? And, we can kind of just move on from there to just the solutions that you see that are kind of working to address those challenges.
Yeah, I mean, higher education has been facing a challenge now in terms of declining enrollment for quite a while. And for those of us who are working in the industry, and for those of us who are kind of engaging with colleges and universities to help them with that, it's been happening for a while now, right? At least a decade plus, where we're seeing kind of declining enrollments. A lot of that has to do with the demographics, but a lot of that has to do with kind of the other side, right? There's the expectations changing. When you take a step back, you look at some of the global trends or what's happening in education as general, right? And you see that there's a lot of demand for education, and you see that the demand is actually going to grow over the next 25 years or so. There's going to be 2 billion new learners. entering, obviously needing education globally. A billion of those are going to be post-secondary folks, or post-secondary. They're going to need post-secondary education, which is anything after high school. And when you look at those numbers, you're like, wow, well, what is happening right now? What is happening in the US? What is happening generally? And a couple of things that at least we're seeing from our side, or at least that I start thinking about, are, well, if you have the demand, then there is certainly a product problem and there's a marketing problem, right? So if the demand is there, then you kind of have this disconnect between what the end user or the consumer needs and how they're discovering the possible solutions out there. So taking a look at higher education, our product has not really changed in a really long time. We're offering the same kind of product or the same education that schools were offering 30, 40, 50 years ago. It hasn't changed in a long time. However, the consumer has changed, right? The students of today and the kind of the learners of today are very, very different from when they were a long time ago. The expectations are completely different. They're kind of digital first folks with Gen Z and so on and so forth. So what ends up happening is that the institutions haven't caught up yet, and COVID has certainly accelerated and made that kind of gap a lot worse, and accelerated, for example, the decline as well, right? Because those two are not matching up. So I would say that is the biggest challenge that we see for higher education, is that the product needs to evolve, and at the same time, because the consumer or the student has so many choices and the marketplace has wide open, it is very difficult to attract that student, or to let them know that this thing exists, this product exists. And that's the marketing side of it. So the marketplace is now more national, more global for that matter. Students can take courses that they're no longer restricted geographically to kind of close to where they are. So they can actually take courses online, or they can take asynchronous courses or live. So all of these things have made it possible for that to become more of a plain level field. And when you don't have a campus to sell, right? So a lot of our institutions are built around this idea of a campus and the campus experience. Then what is, how are you going about marketing, right? Marketing is very different now in this digital kind of landscape. So those are two of the largest challenges that we see right now.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure everybody feels that right now. It's just like, yeah, there's the looming domestic enrollment cliff, which I think is a important distinguisher, especially how you're framing it, where like, there is sort of this, bigger opportunity in kind of the addressable market, as it's called, for global learners, but everybody is sort of competing for those folks. And I think, part of the solution that some folks see around like lifelong learners and adult learners, but they're looking for something completely different in terms of what, a lot of colleges have traditionally offered in terms of degree programs. These, adult working lifelong learners are, looking for very different things. So yeah, I mean, there's just, often, I think for a lot of institutions, they're looking at really high acquisition costs for a lot fewer students. So then you kind of left, scratching your head of just like, okay, like, what are we going to do here? And I kind of have two follow-up questions around sort of the solutions, and I'm curious to see how you take them. So the first one, I kind of want to frame it as like an either or, but certainly take it as you will. If you're like, it depends, or a little bit of both or whatever. But I can imagine that, as you're sort of, an institutional leader thinking about how you're going to address, like paying more for fewer students, because it's just, this like global competitive, market
Right.
for prospective students and everything. Is it that you're like, okay, well, we need to like further invest in more and more and more marketing? Because, the downside I can imagine there, it's like, okay, we're just in this like arms race for, social media ad placements or whatever. But, that could just be the nature of it, and just have to do it smartly. Or do you try to figure out how to be more lean through like, the tools that you use and those sort of things. Because if it's like, okay, if this is just going to be how it is, as we're kind of maybe pivoting and kind of readjusting, we kind of need to like right size differently in terms of how we're deploying, these limited resources. So, um, yeah, curious your take on that sort of either or first, and then we'll go to my next question.
I mean, as a CEO, one of the things that that goes counterintuitive to when you have a downturn or when you have kind of bad bad market conditions is you don't take away money from your growth engine, right? So you don't like the engine that is going to give you more fuel. You don't cut power to those engines, so you still need to move forward, right? Otherwise your plane is going to kind of fall and go nosedive. So think about marketing and think about kind of the admissions teams as those engines that are kind of propelling that institution forward. And that's counterintuitive, right? Because you want to cut costs. And what's the easiest thing to do is essentially cut digital marketing or cut marketing, because there's no person tied to it. There's no family tied to it. So it's like, well, I can't cut down my overhead in terms of people that I'm hiring, but I can cut down my marketing. But then that has a very different effect on kind of the institution overall. So if you're not investing in growth, then you're basically kind of slowly diving, right? So that nose is going down because you don't have a lot of power behind those engines. And that's how I think about it, as of course, as someone who's running a company, but it applies to every kind of organization, right? So you need that growth engine. Obviously, higher education is a little bit different because the Horizons timeline is a bit different there, like a lot longer. It takes a lot longer for an institution to even see the effects of that downward kind of trajectory. However, COVID has accelerated that, and kind of uh, the effects of some of the things that we talked about around the marketplace and kind of where we are, and kind of the digitization and the expectation of the students has also bring to light a lot of those deficiencies that some of the schools have around that. So from my perspective, one of the things that schools need to do is invest more on those growth engines rather than kind of cut down and be lean. Of course, you don't want to have, like, you think about overhead and you think about, okay, are these programs effective? Are we, how many students are we kind of adding to these programs? Like when you look at the parallel from a consumer product company, like they're cutting down product lines very easily. They say this product line is not very profitable. We're not going to invest any more in it, and we're going to cut it down. But you look at it in higher education, it's very, very difficult to kill a program, right? And you have faculty members and you have kind of this dedicated resources that you're adding to that. And it's not bringing in revenue, but you're at the same time, you still keep going on it. So you're not giving more resources to the things that are making you more money or the things that the consumer wants, right? So then it becomes really hard to balance that. So it's I don't know. I mean, how do you think about it? I mean, Dustin, what do you think are, because you look at it from a business perspective and it's like, doesn't make sense. But then what do you think? You're in that area as well.
Yeah. I mean, I've like some exposure to like I for better or worse, I've never been put in a position to have to like make this decision. But I think like, uh, yeah, I mean, what you're saying makes a lot of sense because it is the idea of like if you have this area, marketing, obviously that's the top of the funnel, that's where your growth is going to happen, and you could be like, yeah, like starting to cut costs. And I think like the airplane metaphor is very apt because if you play that kind of metaphor out, you start kind of pulling out sort of the oomph on the engines, there's going to be a like objectively true perception of like, well, we're still moving forward, but you are also like starting to like head towards the ground and potentially crashing.
Exactly.
So it's like, because you're not like in a free fall where it's like, oh, we were moving and now we made a hard stop and we're just crashing straight down. It's like, oh, well, let's just like pull off a little bit. And like, yes, we also, you're still moving forward, but you're also kind of like heading down. So I think that is a very wise bit of advice there. But I think this definitely leads to my like second part of this question around solutions and kind of the topic at hand here of like, AI and its role in sort of supporting, engaging with students and all that is like being lean. I think is something that's going to be really important for higher ed. So kind of like my 2 cents is the idea of like, if you are, this is kind of like building on what you were saying, like, what is like a really good use of those limited resources, and you're leaning into what's working versus just sort of like blindly like, well, yeah, we always just throw money at, this and that, or like this billboard over here that looks really cool and we're really proud of, and like whatever. It's like, well, like, on different forms and things, obviously, like, a lot of places, a lot of companies will say like, well, how did you hear about us and all that. It's like, has anyone ever said like, oh, I decided to enroll in your college because you had a cool billboard, or whatever. It's like one of those things where I think there's always this very like combative, like, people, like presidents or whatever are always proud of like, look at that, like, big poster in the airport or whatever, like, so cool. And it's like,
Exactly.
yeah, sure, but like, be mindful of like how much money are we realistically spending like over like a long term, and how much value are we getting out of it. So it's like about making really smart decisions and using tools that can maybe help you to make those more smartly informed decisions and everything. So as
Exactly.
someone who I think has like way more experience with artificial intelligence than I do, you're in, this really like in a niche space as well, like, tools that sort of help,
Yeah.
utilize artificial intelligence and everything. Like, how do you see this playing into maybe people, higher ed staff, admission staff, marketing staff, hopefully being able to make smarter decisions about what they are doing, aren't doing, how they're spending those limited resources and time and all that.
Yeah. So when we think about AI and when we think about data in general, there's just a lot of low-hanging fruit. One of the things that we use AI quite a bit for is tying back to our original mission of how do we create better knowledge about that student, and how do we personalize our interactions better with that student. If you think about it on the consumer side, you can compare, and this is an analogy that we use quite a bit, is this approach of, hey, you have the traditional way of engaging with students, right, or connecting with them, and you do that through just a push, right, just a push messaging. That's the idea of a cable. Like, think about cable as cable television and cable programming. It's, you get content, when it's kind of programmed by the provider at this a specific time, and by the way, we're going to throw a bunch of commercials at you and this other things that are not relevant, and you can't get it any other way. Now you change that to where the consumer is in the driver's seat, right? When you think about it, now the student is essentially that consumer, and you switch that around to becoming more of a Netflix kind of experience, where I log in, I get to pick what I want to see, or I get to consume whatever content I want to see. And as a smart company, Netflix is probably one of the companies that invests the most in AI, right? You wouldn't think so, but it is actually where a lot of the AI innovation has come out of. They even have a lot of kind of hackathons around their algorithms on how to make better recommendations. So their whole idea is, I want to understand you a lot better than you understand yourself, so I can provide relevant content, and I can provide relevant information and relevant engagement. So when we think about it from our side, from the element side and from the school, it's all about those connections with that student, right? When you're engaging with them in a digital world, and when their inboxes are full and full, and when there's kind of this like this fatigue, right? There's just a lot of fatigue around communications, and this digital communications, because everybody now has become really easy to send emails or to send SMS messages. But knowing, the things that are going to cut through the clutter are the ones that are relevant, the ones that are personalized, and the ones that are timely. And that's how we use AI, and how we see AI being really helpful in this case, because the ability for you to engage is, basically gone down to zero. I mean, well, the cost of that has gone down to zero, but
Mhm.
there is more and more and more, clutter. And how do you cut through that? And the only thing that's working, or that works, is stuff that's relevant. So that's how we feel AI is kind of pushing through. Now you can look at it that way, and you can say, okay, you know what, like, how do we take that same relevance at the marketing level, right? Because now at the marketing level, you're saying, okay, if that student has visited our website, we know exactly what pages they visited. We know how much time they spend in there. We know if they came to our website at 2 a.m. or they started a chat at 2 a.m. So you know all these pieces, and then now you can translate that into providing that action right away to that student, and you can kind of build that intelligence and personalize, saying, okay, if they visited the financial aid page, they're probably a little bit more interested, under the gun. They want some more help, or they need some more information around that. If a current student starts a chat with us at 2 a.m., that's a red flag. It's like huge mental, like they're in some stress, right? So we need to have a
Mhm.
counselor reach out to them. If it's an alumni, right, and they haven't, they have not engaged with you at all, like no signal is also a signal. So these systems need to understand that. So bringing all that together gives you a better understanding of your end user, and then you can let the systems kind of bubble up actions or kind of insights that let you think about what are the interventions now that I need to do, or what are the actions that I need to, or what are the nudges for that matter. So ideally, you want to have the system automate everything, but you're not going to be able to do that. But you're able to get the insight in order for for you to find out, to bubble up those more interesting things that you can do. So that's kind of the way we think about it.
Yeah, and that's great. I mean, because there's like a lot there where like staff members, they'll track things that are going to keep really good logs and all that. And I think nowadays it's only as good as you have some way that it's going to serve up to you to make decisions about like, yeah, like who to reach out to when and how,
Exactly.
about what and everything. Cause like, yeah, like you said, there's a really good examples about how you could really target a relevant email or resource or, outreach of any kind and help anticipate questions and give those answers. So and yeah, I mean, this sort of leads to my next question, because like you were saying, like, yeah, in a perfect world, like everything could just be like, super sophisticated and automated and all these things, and like they because I think we all get that from like you know online shopping and stuff. Like they're all
Exactly.
trying to figure out like what we want and be like, hey, are you interested in this or what? It's like, well, no, I just bought shoes, I don't need more shoe ads or whatever. So it's like, those like automated ads are basing what they're serving up to you on some information, but it's not perfect. So like I'm sure as you maybe are like out at like a networking happy hour like talking about what you do and like AI and stuff, there's some people that sort of are skeptical. And I'm kind of leading towards the answer in my head, so I'm curious if you'll get to it, but
Yes.
maybe just clarify. But like how do you work to combat bias against
Yeah.
AI?
Yeah, of course. So the traditional way that you think about AI is, or at least ML or machine learning, and we can talk about, we'll wrap everything up in kind of this term AI term. But the traditional way that targeting has been done at the around students has been around this idea of demographic data, right? It's like, hey, I know that you live in a particular zip code, and I want to target students with, or household incomes with certain kind of degrees there. I know that you got this test score, and I want to target you based on that. I know that you like this program. I'm going to target you based on that. You're from in-state, out of state. I'm going to target you that. So the demographic stuff, or your race or whatever, like that stuff is very well understood, and you build personas around it, and you target those users. And marketing agencies do that every single day, and that's the traditional way. So that introduces a lot of bias, though, because when you build these models around like, oh, people with high income are more likely to come to our school. Well, yeah, because those are the people that you allowed in because that's what you wanted. So now it's like you're bringing in more and more of the same kind of folks in there. So that's kind of where the bias comes in. Prior data, which is very similar and which is based on demographics, doesn't allow for kind of this, variety of, well, it doesn't allow for kind of what we want, diversity, right? It doesn't allow for diversity. So when we're looking at bias in AI, that's the way we think about it, right? We think about it because that person who comes from a low income school, maybe you didn't buy their data, from the testing services because you were targeting different zip codes because you thought that those zip codes had better yield students from prior years, right? And now you missed out on this great student who would have been a great fit for you. Meanwhile, that student has kind of visited your website multiple times, engaged with your communications. And when we think about it, is that we're trying to remove that bias. And the way that we try to do that is by not looking at the individual person and kind of their firmographic or demographic data, by looking at actions, right? As humans, we're very kind of predictable. So like we're very, beings of behavior. Like we tend to do the same things, or we, at the aggregate, you can model our behavior in a very, very accurate way. So you look at what I did before, and that's a predictor of what I'm going to do next or what I'm going to do later. So that kind of eliminates the bias from, kind of diversity and all the things that we kind of talk about, in higher education around bias. And it placed the effort on actions and behavior. So behavior in this case is we can go back to look at millions of different interactions on, or not interactions, but just journeys, right? You look at a pattern of my interactions. You can say, okay, I opened this many emails. I send you, I responded to your text message. I came to this kind of web page before. I responded within this much time of you sending me that communication. I visited this website yesterday. So those interactions and that pattern, you take all those actions together, and then you build this kind of pattern for that person. Now combine all of those together for 20 million or more, kind of those journeys on how that student moves through. And then you build a very sophisticated kind of AI model where you're looking at actions and you're looking them not just, overall, right, as static, but you also look at them in a time basis. So, somebody who became a prospect and then started an application is 3 days later is very different than somebody who became a prospect and started an application a year later, right? So the algorithm thinks about those things very, very differently. So it takes this time component into effect. And then you start making predictions about next actions on those people, right? And those predictions change every single day. So if I'm making a prediction on you today, or AI is bubbling up you as a person because you visited the website yesterday, they're not going to bubble you up 2 days or 3 days from now because, that interest might have faded. So when we talk about relevant content, we also have to talk about relevant timing. Like timing is everything, right? Just because you said, hey, I bought those shoes already, so why are you still targeting me? Well, maybe they should have targeted you 2 days ago when you were maybe looking at the shoes and didn't buy them yet, but now it's too late. So that's kind of the way we think about it. It's around personalization, but then thinking about behavioral, the behaviors that take away the bias around the demographic stuff that we kind of face every single day.
Yeah, and I will just acknowledge, hopefully other folks kind of clocked it, the irony of like AI can help eliminate bias, and that can help alleviate other people's bias about AI. Like, because yeah, like we're going to make decisions often in lieu of having, the ability to be more data informed by just being like, yeah, like you said, like, oh, I'm just going to like target people who, live close by. Like they'll probably come to our school, right? It's like some of them will, yeah, like, or that come from a certain income background or this or that. Yeah, test scores, any of these little like quantitative measures that, we can maybe, have some sort of, I would say at best, kind of like anecdotal correlation, it's sort of happenstance or something where it's like, yes, sure, a lot of people live close by. Yeah, sure, a lot of people that have like, a certain income level or test score, like they'll come here. But like, it's going to be so much more dynamic or kind of like yeah, I'm trying to think of the right word, but just like it is telling like what a person does. Like they're doing it for a reason,
Right. It's very
more often than not. And
contextual,
it's
right?
like, yeah, right. Yeah. So yeah, it's just that as kind of the primary place where you're going to be making data informed decisions about, like we said, like, how to reach out to somebody when, about what. Uh, yeah, you're again to use the term just because I like it of like you're scratching that itch. Yeah, like they're looking on the website about financial aid information, so let's like let them know. Yeah, there's a webinar with our team about that topic. Why don't you join us? And that can help be like, wow, we've like helped alleviate their concern, and they're like, super excited to start. And it goes from there. But I'm curious briefly, as we're starting to wrap up, but like what was on my mind is the idea of like, you know, on one hand, it's like you automate what you can, like what I think is easy to do and what's effective to do. But on the other hand, when you have AI and machine learning and all these stuff, like it can hopefully in those places where you can't automate, it still allows for like humans to be a part of the process. Like they're going to make kind of the data matter, make sense of it, and make decisions based on those things. So I'm curious how like what your perspective is on that, because I think that that's always people's kind of concern is like, oh well, we're just going to be like, kneeling at the altar of like our automated gods that are just sort of like, doing everything for us or whatever, and assuming it's all perfect and doing the right things all the time. So like, I think adding in that dose of the personal human touch where it's most proper is another way to try to alleviate somebody who's really concerned about some new AI empowered tool.
Yeah. So there's a saying about it, right? Well, not just a saying, but there is kind of a principle that a lot of and us specifically talk about when you're making decisions. You're not making data driven decisions. We talk a lot about data driven decisions, but data driven decisions, there's no one to essentially curate those decisions, right? Us as experts and give us the contextual nature of it. It's very difficult for machines to do that. But data informed decisions is probably a better way to think about it. So the data informs like where and gives us kind of a little bit of a direction of where we should be looking and kind of where we need to figure out like what direction should we be leaning towards. And then there's a lot of other factors that come into play, right? So data is there to inform us, AI is there to help us get those decisions right, help the percentage of getting us those decisions right. So if that makes sense, it's not there to replace and to make the decisions for us, but it helps us with the probability of getting those right. Now, when you think about where the biggest opportunity is, it's in removing decisions and kind of this repetitive tasks that are happening every day, and then let humans do what humans do best, right? Us as humans are better at connecting and engaging with or talking like in this high bandwidth, like having these personal connections with folks and kind of. So that's the highest mode of engagement, is when we talk about one-on-one, and when we talk about kind of real time, either through audio or video or even in person. In person is the highest bandwidth communication. So let humans do that, right? But let the machines get down to bubbling up. What should the humans pay attention to, but not necessarily be the ones to say, okay, we're going to do this thing for you. So that's probably something to keep in mind.
That's always been my point of view as well, as sort of like, can you use sort of like technology to empower like a high touch environment,
Yeah.
especially with stuff like this in education with like, yeah, admissions counselors and coaches and advisors and faculty and all that. So, yeah, that's perfect. So before we do kind of our usual wrap up questions, I'm just curious, like what you're excited about for the future here. Because yeah, I'm sure that the future is very bright when it comes to these tools helping institutions continue to, get the right students at the right time, enrolled in their institutions and everything. But yeah, just curious your perspective.
There's a lot that I'm excited about. Obviously, one of the big things is how these tools are becoming more and more accessible to everybody, and that's one of the things that we work with the most, is how do we make these tools more accessible, easier to use, and how do we make it you know essentially available for everyone. The other thing that we're excited about is that higher education, of course, education in general is going through a huge transformations, and there's going to be kind of winners and losers, and there's going to be business model changes, and you're going to see that happening more and more and more. And the rate of change is really exciting to us, because as innovators in the space, as kind of folks who are kind of trying to push the boundary, to we do a lot of education around what should you be doing, how should you be thinking about this, what the narrative is. And because of these external factors and kind of the rate of change happening more and more, faster and faster, and the digital transformation adoption, it's actually allowing us to become more like part of more of those conversations that can drive outcomes for the better, both from a institution side, on both from a student side. And schools are actually listening, right? So they're listening because they're put into a different position now, where now the student has become the driver, right? So they have to operate with a student-centric approach, student-first approach, rather than be gatekeepers. They are enablers, and they are kind of helpers and guides.
Very good. Yeah. I mean, I think those are, yeah, all exciting things for the future here. But uh, yeah, I mean, as you're kind of navigating the future and just, doing your work every day, is there any relevant resources that you want to share on this or any related topic?
Yeah, we try to post a lot of articles and a lot of white papers on our website. That's element451.com, element451.com. We have our user conference coming up, and that's Engage Summit, and that's going to be actually in 2 weeks, depending on when depending on when the podcast comes out. Folks will probably have an opportunity to kind of either see that live, it's open to everybody, or see the recordings afterwards. But we'll talk a lot about kind of the marketing, engagement, personalization, how it pertains to kind of student engagement, and of course tools and techniques and all of that. The other thing that I want to highlight is that we usually, like when we talk about education at Element 451, we have a great enrollment analytics certificate that we have put together over the past couple of semesters now, and we tend to do that every fall and spring. So we see a huge gap in that area, the data literacy part. So we are trying to kind of push that forward, especially around enrollment analytics. So you can go to our website around that and register for the next cohort of that as well.
Perfect. Yeah, we'll have ways to just check out what y'all are up to and sharing in general. And yeah, for everyone's reference, we are recording this on July 14th, so I think that folks will be able to go and check out the recordings like you mentioned of all the programming that you're putting together. But yeah, so we will end as we always do, though, with a final thought or call to action on this topic to close everything out.
If you work in higher education, and if you've been in higher education for just a couple of months, or maybe you've been a a lifer in higher education, it's probably one of the industries that is the most rewarding working towards. So if you are thinking about leaving higher education, and going to a different industry, I guess the call to action is, stick around, help those students, help institutions. Education is a huge enabler, and kind of a vehicle for lifting up people out of poverty, for lifting people out of different areas, and kind of bringing people together, and making people's lives better. So you're not just working to get a paycheck. Like, obviously you can work on the vendor side, or you can work on the edtech side, or institutions, or helping them directly or indirectly. Stick around. I think it's much more rewarding. It's probably one of the most rewarding areas, or kind of industries out there.
It's a beautiful place to end the episode. Thank you so much for sharing that. And yeah, I mean, whatever shape it takes, for people where it's like, yeah, maybe you're right out of high school trying to, get a bachelor's degree, or you're trying to kind of level up your career later on and pursue education through, certificates or different things like being able to work in this space and help people achieve those dreams and goals and everything is definitely very fulfilling. And yeah, I mean, I can't really imagine myself working anywhere else. So, but thank you so much for hanging out and showing all that you did. And we'll have ways to connect with you and Element 451 and everything else that you mentioned in the show notes as usual. But yeah, this is a great episode, and always love talking about just better ways to engage students and kind of better use institutional resources and everything. So just thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Dustin. I had a great time.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the podcast. Make sure to rate, review, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode of the Higher Ed Geek podcast.